Kyle Crabbs and Jordan Reid of the Draft Network. And Jordan, we're in the process of restacking our predicted big board for the Draft Network's mock draft simulator with the scouting staff. And you and I had a pretty interesting conversation about the edge class specifically. There's a lot of exciting names in this group, but the de facto name that's been at the top for a long time has been Gregory Rousseau, the high upside defensive end who opted out this season from the University of Miami. But you think that there's somebody that might give this dude a run for his money. So why don't you introduce everybody to University of Michigan's Kwity Paye and tell us what stands out so much to you about him and why you think he could end up being edge one.
Yeah, and it's crazy just how the draft process works. And you see this a lot of times throughout the draft process. And we talk about this all the time, whether it's, through text, DM, or in our scouting chatter and our scouting meetings, everything remains fluid. And it's on a week-to-week basis. You see guys standing out, having big-time performances, and then the next week, they don't even show up. So it's a fluid performance with all of these guys. But Rousseau, I'll just talk about him first, a guy that has tremendous length at 6'7", 260 pounds. He has the size that you're looking for. He has those long arms, those lanky limbs that you love to see at the position. And we often refer to him as that moldable piece of clay that defensive coordinators and position coaches are going to love to get their hands on. And he goes out, he has 19 and a half tackles for loss and 15 and a half sacks, and basically his only second year ever playing defensive end. He was a wide receiver and safety in high school, which is a combination you rarely see as far as a transition from DB and wide receiver to defensive end. So he's still a baby at the position, and I think that's why there's still a lot of intrigue there at the position with him. And then on the flip side of that, I'll talk about Kwity Paye from Michigan, a player that a lot of people are excited about right now, leads the country in pressure, doesn't lead the country in pressures, but he has 25 pressures in 3 games so far this year. And just to put that into context, the 3 leading guys at the position right now are Jordan Smith from UAB, Teron Jackson from Coastal Carolina, and then some others at the position as well that have 35. And all of them have played 7 or 8 games so far this year. So Paye is pretty much he's on their tails right now. He hasn't even played half the games to this point. So that just goes to show you the context. Even though Michigan is not having a good year at 1-2 right now, he's been a very nice bright spot for them. And there was a lot of talk about Aiden Hutchinson, the opposite of him, coming into the year. But the next closest person to him is 7 pressures. So he has 25 as opposed to 7. That's the next closest person to the next closest player to him. So the thing that I love about Paye, though, is that he's super versatile. And what I mean by versatile is that you kind of get either or with pass rushers coming into the league. Either he's a good pass rusher or he's a good run defender. With him, he's a really nice blend of both. And he already had it figured out as a run defender last year. You saw the strong hands at the point of attack. He's just mauling offensive tackles, and you see their heads kind of jerk back whenever his hands get placed onto them. So whenever he's able to do that, and the Penn State game last year was one that really stood out as far as from a run defense standpoint. I think he really stood out. This year, he's just been on an absolute tear as far as a run defender and as a pass rusher. And that light is really starting to come on for him. He still has some developing to do as far as with his hands and what he needs to do as far as a go-to move and then counter moves. But he's just kind of experimenting out there, and it's still working for him. So I really like what Kwity Paye brings to the table.
So real quick, I think there's a bigger scouting conversation to have here. You talking about heavy hands, right? And seeing the head jerk back. So if you're not familiar with kind of some of these scouting phrases Jordan's referring to, that point of first contact, right? And that's always a really good tell to see what kind of upper body power and explosiveness a guy has. When that first punch lands, do you see those shoulder pads raise and that head go back, Jordan, like you were talking about with Paye? And when he catches you square, he hits with a ton of bricks. And that's kind of the interesting dynamic between him and Rousseau for me. Is you think about the build of these guys, and Rousseau, you talked about the long arms, but he's much more of a lean build, whereas Paye is a little bit more condensed, and short pass rushers, are they going to be okay? Well, as long as they're long, they'll be fine. And Paye definitely does have that length to him, and he's walking around at 275 pounds. So he's got so much more density in his frame. So that's why for me, if you're going to covet Rousseau over Paye, I'm making the case to do so based on the ceiling of what he can become and how comfortable you are with adding that extra onto his frame and trusting he's still going to be the same kind of athlete.
And I think it just depends on what you want walking through the door. Do you want the player that you can develop, the athletic specimen that eventually has the upside that you're seeking from a first-round pick, or do you want the player that's, I wouldn't say surefire. I think he's pretty much more mature walking through the door as far as a playing style standpoint. And just put it in his lamest terms, it's kind of like comparing Carlos Dunlap against Melvin Ingram, just to put the two guys into
Hmm.
context
Yeah.
as far as the type of players that they eventually could be. Now, I think Rousseau has a little bit more upside than what Dunlap has been to this point, but Dunlap has been a really good player. He's just played in Cincinnati where he hasn't had a lot of notoriety. He's been one of the best players in that franchise's history. So I think with Rousseau, though, it's just a matter of you being patient and just trusting him to eventually what he could become. But do you want that Melvin Ingram type of player walking through the door, which I think Kwity Paye can be?